Hi again everyone, it's me Jess, and today I've got another craft video for you here on Independent Arts' YouTube channel. And the thing that I want to show you today, as it's coming up to summer, or I'm hoping, waiting for the weather to get a bit nicer, and hopefully going to be sitting outside of a nice summer evening. So I wanted to show you how to make these sunset lantern jars. Summer sunset, recycled jam jar lanterns. It's really simple. You're only going to need a few things, and there's a range of beautiful designs that are really simple to do that I'm going to show you today. Right, the things that you're going to need. Firstly, we're going to need a glass jar, so a jam jar, or if you're like me, I live on pasta, so I've always got a wonderful supply of pasta sauce jars, Lloyd Grossman. So find some glass jars, make sure they're nicely cleaned out. We don't need the lid, so get those. Any shape or size will do. As I said, these lovely shaped ones look really nice, or you can have some taller ones, more of a Dolmio pasta sauce possibly. Or even some squarer coffee jars I've used, and they look really nice as well. So any shape or size will do. We're going to need just some normal acrylic paint, and if we're going to do the sunset design, we're just going to need some red and some yellow, maybe some blue, optional. We'll need some black, and again optional, a little bit of white. To apply this paint, we're not even going to need any water handy. We're going to apply it dry. We're going to need some sponges. Now these ones I picked up cheap from an art shop, but you can just use a normal washing up sponge as well. I've done that before. As well as our sponges to add some detail and silhouette afterwards. We're going to need a couple of paintbrushes. Recommend a sort of flat square one and a smaller, more pointed one to do some detail. We will need some masking tape and some scissors to cut that if you want. And we're also going to need either some wire or alternatively some twine to make the lantern handle. Obviously if you use wire you might need some snips. We're going to need as well, lastly, a tea light candle. I can recommend the battery operated ones. They're actually, obviously they're far safer. You can leave them unattended, and they also don't go out when you try and drop the candle into the jar, but I've just got a normal tea light candle as well. And that's it. Something to mix your paint on, a little palette of sorts, and we're good to go. The very first thing we're going to need to do is mask off some stripes going up our glass jar. Right, this isn't actually strictly necessary for this sunset design, but it does help keep our gradients straight. You might remember I did a similar activity video at Christmas time doing some winter design lantern jars, and there where we had a stronger contrast between the dark sky and the white snow, it was far more important to mask off these lines, but I said it does help, but we'll be blending the colours together with our sponges, so it's not strictly necessary. If you haven't got any tape to do this, you can still follow the design without it. So, and again, where we're blending the colours, these bits of tape don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be butted right up against each other if you don't want to. It's just going to give us a rough guide to create our sunset sky gradients. So depending on the size of your jar and how many layers of tape you'll fit, I think I'm going to fit 4 up here. I've left a gap at the bottom, and I've actually used, there's a little bit of a lip at the bottom of the jar, which I've used as a guide to make sure I've got the first one straight. So round go. See, if you have quite a tall glass jar, you might be able to get several more layers of tape up. I'll show you, for example. This one is the tallest one I've done, and you can just about see there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of tape and stripes in the gradient that we did. But on this one, I'm only going to fit 4, and this 4th one's going to take it right up to the top, which is perfect. And that's step 1. Now we've masked up our jar, we can get straight into the painting. And like I said, we don't need any water. We don't need to dilute the paint at all. I'm going to start off with some yellow. So onto my palette, I've just got a piece of paper here. We're going to squash some plain yellow acrylic. And I'm going to I've just broken my sponge up into a few bits, so I'm going to be using one of these dry to help with the blending. I'll show you that in a minute. So we start with our yellow. I'm just going to get a little bit straight onto the dry sponge, and we are going to dab the paint onto the jar. And because we're using this sponge in this way, the paint is applied sort of in a really nice textured way. It's got lots of little bubbles that are going to show up. It's going to create quite a rough texture, and because of that, it's going to let some of the light from our candle through. It's going to make it be quite a translucent colour, as opposed to if we applied the paint to the glass with a paintbrush, for example. You know, that would be a lot thicker, smoother, and as you'll see when we use the paintbrush to do the silhouette in the black, you know, it covers more of the glass, doesn't let the light through. So we use the sponges like this to make a nice textured translucent yellow. We've done our first layer. So I'm going to take the first bit of tape off, and you'll see, stick that somewhere. You'll see we've got one layer of the yellow so far. Oh, a bit of a pro tip when painting these jars, if you can, sort of however many, a whole hand or just a finger to hold the jar from the top, so you don't get paint all over your hands. Right, next we're going to get a little bit of the red acrylic, and I'm going to make a little blob of that there away from the yellow. And then what I'm going to do now, as I go up the jar, is add just a little bit of red more to the yellow with each layer of the gradient, making it a darker and darker orange. And we don't want to mix our paint on the palette. We want to keep it separate and have a nice natural gradient of colour. So I'm just going to add tiny bit of the red to the yellow paint that I've already got, and using the same sponge, I'm going to get a little bit of this, mainly yellow, with a little bit of red paint onto this bit of the sponge, and I'm going to do just the same and start dabbing like so. You can start sort of further away up towards this next bit of tape, just to make sure you're getting the balance right. We don't want to go too dark too quickly, so we're only adding really just a tiny bit of the red to it. And we can use the sponge, take it up to that first layer of yellow that we did. And start to blend it in with that first stripe. You may, if you find that it's too dark, add a little bit more yellow. You do want, as gradual a gradient as you can. Obviously depends on the height of your jar as well. If you've got a taller jar, like I said, you can fit more shades in. And also one thing you can do to help blend it is get, like I said, get a dry sponge or a dry corner of your sponge and go over that bit where your two stripes have joined, and by dabbing up and down we can blend those two shades together. And what we have now is a yellow going up to a very, very slightly darker shade of yellowy orange. Try not to get, you don't have to get paint all over yourself like me. And it's time to take off that next layer. And we're going to repeat that last step by adding a little bit more red to our splat of yellow paint. Again, not mixing it on the palette, keeping it quite a bit separate. And we're going to get that slightly darker shade of orange now, and start dabbing like so. And if you do what I said, not do as I do, and hold the jar like that, you shouldn't end up dabbing it all over your fingers like I just did. Okay, and again we can get our slightly drier sponge and give it a little dab over, up and down where our join was, to get that gradual gradient. And I said, hopefully you can see now, we started off at a very yellow at the bottom and we're slowly going up to a darker orange. Right, so the next layer, exactly the same again. Let's add some more red into this yellow and red mixture. So we haven't mixed up an orange on the palette, remember. It is literally just, I might even bring it up to show you, because this does make the difference. I haven't mixed up an orange, I've just added a little bit more red each time to my yellow. So we've got a mixture of both, and I think what I can do, I can even afford to have a little bit more. So we're getting up to a much more reddy orange now, a lot more fiery, getting that lovely sunset gradient. Now obviously these, these aren't the only colours that you get in the sky of a sunset or at any time of day. Beautiful dawns as well. There's beautiful sunsets that have far more sort of pastel colours in rather than fiery reds and oranges. Obviously you might have seen some beautiful skies with pinks and purples and pastel sort of peaches. I think that it would be really fun to experiment with using some of those tones as well, using this same technique. Right, and again I'm going to use that, dabbing up and down. Now for this activity obviously we're only using basic super cheap acrylic paint. There is proper glass paint and stuff that you can get that probably be a lot more longer wearing than this. I mean, if you left one of these out in the rain or actively picked at the paint with your fingernail, I'm sure it wouldn't last very long. But as an ornament, and as I said, as something we can make with things that we've probably already got lying around, recycling those glass jars into something. Right, so coming along nicely now. We started at the bottom, we're coming up, so I'm going to have one more layer. Not going to go all the way to the top of the jar, although you can. I'm going to stop sort of roughly where the thread starts. Right, we're going to have a lot more red. It's going to be mostly red now, this top layer, with just a little bit of yellow through it. dabbing up and down. If you ever think, oh, I've made a mistake and gone too dark too quickly with your gradients, using that dry sponge like we were doing the blending with on that area really helps to blend it all in. It'll normally fix the problem. It's happened to me several times. So here we go again, going up and down with a drier sponge. So using the same sponge all the way through, where we still want all these colours mixed in. And there we go. That is the second step, really. Our first layer of colour onto our jar. And instead of where we've used a sponge, it hasn't completely covered the glass. There's little gaps, little bubbles, little gaps in between the paint, which our lovely candlelight's going to shine through. I think it's going to look lovely. Put it up this way to dry for a bit. Like earlier I showed you these two examples as well, where we've gone right up to a sort of a purple shade as well. It's easier to do with a taller glass jar, but that's also a really nice effect to add into the sunset gradient, another extra beautiful shade. And this one, quite hard to see also as I've got towards the darker purple. I've even added a few splatters of white for a little bit of emerging starlight as well as the sun sets. So I'm going to show you quickly how to do that. It's very, very similar to what we've just done with this, but we've just add in a few extra shades of colour from this deep orange, go into a red, and then add a little bit of blue through that to go into a nice purple. So I've masked this slightly taller glass jar up, and I'm going to quickly show you how to add that extra colour in and do just slightly different design with a little bit of added blue and purple shades up the top. Right, as you can see, now I've kind of got to where we got to gradient-wise with the smaller jar. So I'm going to show you slowly now, well, a bit more detail, how to add that next layer of gradient, although I cannot find the end of my tape at all. Where is it? I think it's here. There we go. So we've got to sort of quite a deep orange, and what I'm going to do for this top one now is just red. I might even have the tiniest little bit of yellow through this bit of red where I've been mixing from one to the other, but basically I'm going to go 4. See, I'm using the same sponge, so it's got a little bit of that yellow and orange still in it as well. I'm going to go for a layer of, a stripe of just red. Get that sunset looking beautiful. So I've got a layer of red, and again using a drier one that's got a bit of this orange on still as well, and where those two shades meet, dabbing around up and down just to blend them together. And also when we do this, if there's anywhere that's got a bit too much paint on. It's a little bit too thickly applied and not going to let as much light through. It just lifts a little bit off to keep that translucency for our candle to shine through. So I've got one layer left. So to take this sunset right up to the top from my last layer, I'm going to add just a touch of blue acrylic into the red that I've already been using. I'm going to pop a little bit next to it. And we can take a little bit from each. So I'll get a little bit of that red, a little bit of the blue, all on the same sponge. I'm going to dab that red and blue, not a mixture, I've not mixed it to make a purple or anything on my palette, just taking a little bit of each on the still relatively dry sponge and applying them in that dabbing motion. So our colours are basically, you know, they get mixed right there on the jar, and it looks like a much more natural gradient. As your eyes seeing a little bit of all the shades. There we go. And that is looking like a very beautiful sunset. So I'm going to leave that to dry with the other one, and then we'll be ready for the next step, the silhouettes. Right, so for the silhouettes, there's a number of different designs that I've had a play around with before. The first one that I went for, oh, this one's, the handle's coming off a bit on this one. The first one that I went for was kind of like a palm frond or palm tree design. You can either just do the palm leaves, or you could add some trunks and stuff as well in there. That's a nice tropical one. A bit of a nautical theme with some little sailboats. So you see both of these I have added, and I'll show you in a minute, with a sort of a flatter, squarer paintbrush like this. I've added either here a black layer of sort of ground silhouette, or I thought this looked quite nice as well, using a red. Almost looks more like, sort of, instead of the ground, it's more like the sea, and a nice sort of fiery reflection of that sunset sky. So on this one I've done a few little birds, simple, you know, really simple shapes for these silhouettes. You know, you haven't got to, that's the great thing about silhouettes, is obviously it's just the shadow, there's no detail. So just some simple, almost like M shapes for the birds in the sky. Some triangles depicting sailboats in the distance. For these palm fronds, again, just a centre line with some brush strokes coming off. Again, this was quite a fun design, and again, pretty simple to do. I thought a nice, more desert sunset as opposed to a tropical beach sunset. So I've added some cactus, and again, a few birds in the sky. Another fun design idea is, again, instead of using the paintbrushes, keeping on with the sponges, and specifically the sponges that we've used to do the gradient background, just add in some more of those very same colours. So here I've had some, you know, some of that purple, a little bit more of the blue, we've still got the oranges, and using that same dabbing technique but with a little bit more paint, adding some clouds in as well. I thought it looked quite effective, and looks great once that tea light's flickering behind them. And I'll show you this as well. This is one other design idea that I did, again using the flat square brush with a layer of black around the bottom in a minute. But when I first started doing the gradients, on that first yellow gradient with the first bit of tape, I've added a white semicircle before I've gone in for the yellow around, and carried on as usual to make a little bit more of a setting sun. And the great thing about these as well is, especially if we have the the little layer at the bottom. When we have our tea light in, the candle, the flame itself, or the battery flame, always sort of comes up to about here, and does look very much like the setting sun. So, like I said, there's a number of different design ideas that you can do for the silhouette. I will show you just a few. For those, we're going to need some black acrylic. Again, I'm not diluting any of this, especially for this layer. We want a nice thick black layer now for any silhouette design that we do, because unlike the first layer of paint where we actively wanted our light to shine through, we want to stop the light coming through in our design and have that contrast. Right, so to do this, these clouds, this cloud design, I said we're going to use exactly the same sponge that we used to do the gradient, and we're going to be keeping the same palette as well. So all of these splodges of red, yellow, orange and the blue that I've got on this palette anyway, I'm going to just dab a little bit more from that, and with this just a corner of the sponge, start dabbing some clouds. They can be quite big fluffy clouds, or you can just do some little sort of streaky clouds using those same colours. Again, you might want to, if you've done something that you're not overly happy with, want to blend it in a little bit more, use a dry bit of sponge. As you can see, you know, not in any particular shape, but just using those colours and adding a few little, like this. See, we can go sticking with the colour gradient that we've got, have the darker sort of blues and purples towards the top, and if we want some contrast at the bottom, we could have some clouds in that sort of more fiery red or orange. So here we go, there's a few wispy clouds there. I'm going to get just a little bit of red and yellow to have a little cloud further down here nearer the horizon. I find the best shape, the easiest shape to do, is sort of one where you're tailing off either end sort of into a bit of a point and have a bit of a fluffier, fatter bit in the middle. It's generally as a rule of thumb an effective sort of cloud shape. We can add a few, even sort of further up, we can add a few of the little clouds in that brighter yellow as well, just to have a few bits where it's catching the sun. I'm just going to dab that in. So there we go. That is one design idea anyway, with some clouds. You can leave that as is, or go even further and add your silhouette on top of this. Now, moving away from our sponges for a bit and going to these brushes, I'm going to show you how I've done the bottom part. You can either do in a black acrylic, or as I said, it also looks pretty effective in the red and a lot more like the sea as opposed to the land, where it would be more reflective of the sky above it. And I recommend using these, something like this, to do this, because you can use that flat edge to try and keep your line straight. See, something you could do if you're a little bit less impatient than me is wait till your jar's completely dried and you could stencil, or again possibly mask off this bottom bit to make sure you get a really straight edge. But quite often jars will have a little bit of a lip at the bottom as well, so you can use that to help guide you. Just go around like this, again holding it from the top if you don't want to get paint all over your hands. So it doesn't have to be straight as well, you know, if you wanted to do, depending on what landscape you wanted to show in your sunset. If you wanted to do a desert mountain range, you could have some rocky peaks, you could have a cityscape even. I think the possibilities are endless really, but there we go. That's like so. So it gives us a nice silhouetted base that we can add some more detail from. So for example, I haven't done one of these yet, it's a bit of an experiment. How about, I've done palm fronds, how about palm trees? So we'd have something going up from, again, if you're not, something that's easier, if you're not particularly comfortable drawing freehand or painting freehand onto it. So as much as I do painting and stuff, this is actually easier. You can use the brush itself to dab and almost print, as opposed to thinking of it as like a pencil or a pen. You know, applying the paint a little bit more like this. So if you can tell what it is, it's going to be the trunk of a palm tree, coconut tree. I might add some coconuts. And then for our palm fronds, a few leaves like that. Add some detail in like that. There's one palm tree. Let's add another. I think it needs another leaf. Frond there. There we go. There's one. How about adding another one, another taller one, coming up this way? Yeah, obviously, ideally, if you're not doing a YouTube video and trying to do it all at once, do let each bit dry a little bit before you go on to the next bit. Otherwise you could end up like me with paint all over your hands. So here we go. Let's have a taller one here. So our trunk will be wider at the bottom. You can print with the side of a little brush like that to also get a bit more texture into your trunk. Looks a lot better than just a straight line. So, you know, nature's not perfect, so neither has to be your artwork. And some palm fronds in here. So this is just one design idea. I said there's so many things that you could do. Anything that you'd like to see silhouetted in a sunset. I did actually think a sort of a Remembrance Day design would probably look really, really lovely as well, like sort of a remembrance sort of vigil candle with poppies or something like that. So there we go. There is one design that I'm going to show you, and we have the cloud one here as well. All that's left to do now is to make our handles for the top. I said it's not necessary, don't have to have them hanging, they look lovely just as tea light holders, but to have the full sort of lantern style, we're going to want something you can hang it and hold it with. One good method is to get some craft wire like this. Oh. Again, dry your pots upside down. Not like me. Do as I say, don't do as I do. To get our wire handle, I normally sort of bend it to the right width and shape, somewhere in the centre, and then bring one side of the wire round. And what I do is I go underneath the thread from where our jar lid used to screw on. If you put the wire or the twine or ribbon, obviously only use those if you're using a battery tea light. And so if you put the wire round underneath that, it will keep it in place. So there's one side, and bring it round the other way, and do the same on that side, wrapping it round the top of the jar underneath the thread. And when we get to the bottom of the handle, let's give it a little wrap around a few times, and then using some wire cutters, just tidy up those ends and pinch them in so you don't stab yourself in the fingers. And there we have a wire handle. And another option that we've got, getting paint everywhere now, would be to do pretty much the same as that, but this nice twine I think would probably look quite good as well. Again, we're going to go around, but obviously with twine you're going to have to tie a knot. It's a little bit more fiddly possibly than just wrapping a bit of wire around. We can tie one knot here. Make that a double. Take our handle over, sort of hold it in place where you want it to come to, and wrap this bit of twine around underneath the thread. This is why wire can be a little bit easier, because it generally stays bent in place where you put it. We can tie that side as well. And again. Trim the edges, and we've got one with a twine handle as well. And now I've lit some tea lights. Like I said, always do recommend the battery operated ones, but I've popped some tea lights in there now, and as you can see, the finished product of the ones that we've done today, I think they look lovely. So really, really easy, simple techniques. Don't really need any art expertise or experience whatsoever. And you can see the flame of the tea light really does look like a setting sun coming through those beautiful gradient colours that we've applied to our recycled glass jars. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye.